Life is changing. The world is changing. Our forefathers created a water system for us, and it is almost our moral obligation, our duty, to pass along that legacy. And that's the way we kind of look at it.
Water is that element that refreshes the spirit, makes the body able to do what it does, helps the inspiration in the long view and in the daily life view of those who have the privilege of coming across it. It might be a sprinkler in a park that you run through as a kid. It is certainly the creek bed that you saw as a boy or a young girl and were able to hide out in the woods maybe from your parents for a while. It's the experience rafting, one of Colorado's river, or the great experience of all through the Grand Canyon. Taking a side hike and standing in a falls with your arms outstretched and just having the water pour over your head. Each of these experiences are experiences that remind you how closely connected our spirit is with our body. The early Celts apparently thought the body resided within the soul. And if that is so, the envelope is probably water.
Water is the essence of life. It is something that we often take for granted. It falls from the sky. But the need for water is omnipresent. It's everywhere, and it's quite a valuable resource when you don't have it. As Benjamin Franklin said, you know the value of water when the well runs dry.
Out here in what is really one step removed from a desert, water is the difference between life and death. It's the difference between economic success and marginal economic activity at all. It's the difference between comfort and despair. What people do with water in its many forms is what sort of defines us as Westerners.
Water's an artistic kind of thing in that it's very similar to music and our appreciation of music. It's restful. It tends to allow us to meditate and to float in a reverie that is very relaxing. It's purifying, and I think the cleansing nature of water is what attracts us to storms and makes us realize that it has a very special quality that we can't take for granted.
98% of us, or something like that, reacts, I think, in a very special way with the singing waters, the bubbling waters. You cannot go out onto a river or a creek, an irrigation ditch. You cannot turn on the headgate without feeling the rush of life pouring out onto the fields. And I'm certain the early settlers understood that and loved that greatly, especially those who came to the Union colony in 1870, nothing but a sagebrush plain, and then turned the water onto that plain and saw a creation reinvent itself.
Water to me is the key renewable resource in our area. All of Greeley would be treeless except for the quarter of the South Platte and the Poudre Rivers. We were basically a high plains desert before the founders of Greeley brought water to Greeley in canals and started irrigation. The key to really not only Greeley but all of northern Colorado is the availability of water, and it's a resource which is rather scarce. We're coming to the end of the availability of unappropriated waters in our area.
One memory I have of my grandfather when I was working for him on the ranch, he took me into town one day to get some supplies and drove the pickup up to a little hillside behind one of Greeley's nicer homes, and at that point got me out of the truck and walked me over to the sidewalk and pointed to a little patch of ground, the very back of this backyard, that was full of yucca and cactus and prairie grass and sandhills, basically, the prairie that our cattle ranch was really made of. And he said, "Now, son, just remember, that's what this whole country looked like before they brought the water. And don't forget that."
This is an area of rocks and cactus, of sagebrush and buffalo grass. And if you go outside in the city of Greeley, you see Tree City, USA. We have a lot of trees, we have a lot of green. It's the environment that we as a society have decided that this is a much better way of living. Greeley is a unique community, I believe, in that it has always recognized the value of water as a tool to create the lifestyle that the citizens want to have. And that's why it's so much fun to work here, because there is this respect for the use of water to change things. It's a community that recognizes what they want their lifestyle to be and are willing to go to the effort of building 35 miles of wooden pipeline across the prairie 100 years ago to bring water to the parks and gardens of Greeley. It's just an amazing community, and I love working here.
Well, Greeley is one of the outstanding places in the United States from my perspective. I traveled about 100,000 miles a year for 20-some years, and I was always glad to get back home. We have a rather agrarian type of community. Greeley is the county seat for a very large county, most of which is agriculturally oriented.
I've traveled over the world quite a bit, and I've never seen a better place to live year-round than here in northern Colorado. It's going to continue to grow and develop, and that growth will last as long as our water lasts.
Greeley is different than some of our neighboring communities in that we've had visionary leadership when it comes to water. The success of Greeley's water system starts with a vision of what it needed to be in the future, a long-term view. It's not just what we need for today, but what do we need for the future, and a willingness to invest in that future.
From the founding of the colony in 1870 to the 1890s, they were drinking Poudre River water, which is pretty nasty stuff even back then. So they began to drill wells. The project went way over time, it went way over budget. They lost the drill rig down the hole a couple of times, but they hit water. Now, it was artesian water. It was highly mineralized. But that was a good thing because Greeley was going to be the spa of the Rocky Mountains. And they loved it, so they drilled another well and another. By the end of 6 wells, the artesian head was relieved and the wells went dry. That was quite a shock to the citizens of Greeley, and they recognized that they would have to do something. They bonded themselves for $330,000, which in today's money is about $25 million. Now, there were maybe 5,000 people in Greeley at that time, so that's like a $25,000 mortgage for every family in the city just for a water supply. It's an amazing feat. And what they did with that money is they bought up a water right. They built a wooden pipeline 35 miles across the prairie to the mouth of the Poudre River, and they built a state-of-the-art filter plant. And for the next 40 years or so, that one water supply provided for the city of Greeley to triple and quadruple even in population. That one major effort lasted them 40 years. But during the drought of the 30s, the dirty 30s, the people of northern Colorado recognized they really needed a supplemental water supply to get them through the years when the snowpack was pretty light. Charlie Hansen of the Greeley Tribune took up the cause, and the idea was to tap into the Colorado River, bring it across the Continental Divide to the east slope. They had to drill the longest tunnel of that kind that's ever built. They had to create a new form of government, and they had to convince the farmers in the midst of a depression to mortgage their farms and everybody else to tax themselves to pay back the loan, this new loan, to the federal government. The vote passed, 96% in favor, and the Colorado Big Thompson Project was born, brought an entire new Poudre River over to the east slope.
Our respect for water has to grow as the population of this planet grows, and in particular the population of Colorado, and bringing it down to our community level, the population of Greeley. I think we are becoming more and more educated each year that water is probably the major resource that we're apt to be confronted with on an international basis as being something we have to be very cautious about.
A ditch company that Greeley has bought some shares and is now involved in was lowering the level of a reservoir in order to irrigate some corn in September. That's what the farmers do. They need to get that corn one more time before they can take it out of the field. But a woman whose house was right near the reservoir called up irate. It was Labor Day weekend, and she called the manager of the reservoir company, absolutely irate, and said, "You can't lower this reservoir. I have company in all weekend, and I want them to be able to see this beautiful full reservoir." And the company manager very politely said, "Well, ma'am, the farmers who own the reservoir water need that water to produce corn. You do know that farmers are producing food for you." And she snapped, "Well, I don't buy my food from farmers, I buy my food from Safeway."
I think most folks are complaining about the cost of gasoline today, but if you got enough money to buy the product, you can still get gasoline. I think the day is coming in the West when availability of water will be the paramount question or dilemma. Even if you have the money to pay an outrageous price for water, it may not be available. You need to learn to conserve what we have.
A lot of people came here in the 90s, and we happened to be in the wettest cycle we had been in. I mean, we were flush with water. We always had water. And so the perception was, why are these guys out here trying to develop water and build reservoirs when they don't need it? You know, the rivers always run. The reason the reason the Poudre River runs through the fall, late summer and fall, is reservoir releases. The drought was probably the best education we could have. When the drought came, people all of a sudden said, maybe we do need more water. Maybe we do need to develop this. It was the wake-up call.
As we've seen the last few years, droughts, our reservoirs, we didn't have the snowfall in the winter. The farmers didn't get the rains that they needed. And, you know, there were watering restrictions. There were reservoirs that were 20, 30, 40% empty. And we've got to be careful not only of our water usage, but of our water retention and making sure we store as much of our water here before it gets downstream into somebody else.
My pleasure in life now is my nice yard, but it's somewhat extravagant. And when that drought comes and you have to go to once a week, well, I'll have to go to once a week, same as everybody else does, and my yard will look terrible.
The citizens get very upset when they find their neighbors who are not obeying the water restrictions. I mean, you would think it's an armed robbery going on when the people call in to our water headquarters and say, he's watering on the wrong day or something. Now, that's a bit over the top, but it points out to me that people take this very seriously.
We don't need to have these big, broad expanse lawns that we inherited from the Eastern and Midwestern way of life. You can understand how the settlers wanted to create what they came from, the well-watered green look. Well, I guess we're realizing now that we actually can use less and still enjoy life. We need to preserve the trees. Those need to be watered and kept alive. They are our canopies, our urban canopies.
If you look around Greeley, every tree that you see is an unnatural artifact. It doesn't belong here. But we as a society have decided that we like the microclimate. We like the trees here. It's green, it gives shade in the desert, and that takes water.
I think a lot of people tend to take trees for granted. They're just something that grows, and certainly other parts of the country, other than Weld County, trees have a little easier life than they have here. Here we actually have to work at having healthy trees. In other parts of the country, Missouri River Valley, etc., trees just kind of happen. They grow on their own, and in many cases people spend a lot of their energy keeping the forest cleared away. Here we have to make that same kind of conscious effort to keep them fed and insect-free and nourished and pruned and maintained.
I think a lot of people who move here don't understand, if they come from the east like I did, what it takes to sustain a nice yard or nice parks like that without the natural rain. It's really incumbent on newcomers to understand the costs associated with, as some people term it, making the desert bloom.
They need to understand the simple model of a snowflake that falls, that becomes a water drop that goes into the river, that flows into one of the reservoirs, and then flows to our treatment plants and ultimately comes out of their faucet. If they can understand that journey, they'll have an appreciation of why we need to conserve that resource and use that resource wisely.
Colorado is such a wonderful place to live. The mountains, the prairies, the wide open spaces. People will continue to come to Colorado. If we stop developing water for them, they will not stop coming. We will share the same amount of water with more and more people.
If we continue the growth we're in, we're going to have some very serious problems, and when we go back to limiting, you won't see the great green lawns around here unless we get additional supplies or are able to work something out. And the kind of the tragedy is the supplies that are being taken are the farm supplies, and so the farmers we won't see any of the farming in this area that we've always had. This has been a fantastic farming community, but it's dwindling because the farms are being eaten up by the cities, and they take that water.
Well, the water will come off the farms. And so when people of the West Slope become alarmed about further water coming from them, people on the East Slope are also very concerned about water coming off this great irrigated open space, which was the root of the great and growing city. So now we're in the new era of trying to figure out how to collaborate, conserve, and share this great water treasure.
The people on the East Slope need to understand that the legitimate concerns of the West Slope people, and I think it's been a friction in this state forever. It's not just a new thing. It's something that's been going on as long as the first West Slope diversion.
They're not thinking it out very well. All they have to do is go outside and see the water running by their house. That doesn't mean they're keeping it. That just means it's getting downhill.
They're very selfish. They want to be able to recreate. They want their new drenches. They want their fishing. They want their skiing. They want all those advantages. But they don't want us to help develop the society that makes those things possible.
Water has always been controversial in Colorado. The way that we can minimize that controversy is through good planning and through good dialogue with those who have a need for water to fulfill their growth and their demand. We need good judgment, we need wisdom, and we need the willingness to talk to all of the constituents in Colorado that are interested in water. And if we do that, I think the whole state can have a prosperous future.
To build a water project takes 15, 20 years. If you don't have it, you don't have a water supply for the community that you want. We were all welcomed in some way to this great land, and I think that planning for community is the key to being able to accommodate these future and our future sons and daughters, grandsons, granddaughters, and the citizens who want to join us as part of this Great Divide community.
The solution is you have to get more water into Colorado or change your lifestyle, because you can't accommodate these great number of people without doing something along that line, and we owe it to future generations to do something.
We are at this moment embarking on our third major effort, a major acquisition of water. And that is an exciting time to be in, to recognize that you are part of a historic legacy.
What we're trying to do is purchase some Trans Mountain water. It's brought over from the Laramie River. The value of that water for us, we need to have that. It fits our portfolio and works really well for us. It's one of those that doesn't have too many bugs with it. The bugs have been worked out. And I'm gonna have to do that, excuse me. There. Now is the time that we need to step up and just keep ahead of the curve. We've got to be in there and go after the water and try to purchase it. This is a huge deal for us. And to purchase this water, and it's just a start of what we've got to do.
We're only here for a brief period of time, and there'll be a lot of other people that'll come along after we're here. The people that are here now are enjoying the benefits of the planning and the sacrifices of the people that were ahead of us. And in order for us to carry out our role to society, we have to plan for the future and make sure that the people that come along after we're gone have the same opportunities and the same benefits that we've enjoyed.
I think we all share a responsibility for making sure that folks have that broader concept of how important water is to the community. And as we grow, not lose the traditions, but also be able to look forward as well and think of how change is going to come at us and how we deal with that.
To each of us, the land, the air, the water, mountain, canyon, mesa, plain, lightning bolts, clear days with no rain. At the source of all thirst, at the source of all thirst-quenching hope, at the root and core of time and no time, the Great Divide community stands astride the backbone of the continent, gathering, draining, reflecting, sending forth a flow so powerful it seeps rhythmically from within, alive to each of us, to drink, to swim, to grow corn ears, to listen to our children float the streams of their own magnificence. Out of their seeping dreams, out of their useful silliness, out of their source mouths high and pure. The Great Divide, you and I, all that lives and floats and flies and passes through all we know of why